Rosa, do you anticipate it still?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and. So we're doing this via YouTube and then we'll pass it on. So thank you very much for joining us today. This is Rosa Beltré from the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. And we are going to be joined by our members and community partners from the Central Ohio region. We will be talking about the impact of VOCA and the cuts within our communities, our programs, and for survivors. So Lori, if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Lori Jones-Perkins. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the director at New Directions and then also the regional leader for Central Ohio with OAESV.
Thank you. Meg?
My name is Meg Dennis, she, her, hers. I'm the manager for SARNCO, the Sexual Assault Response Network for Central Ohio here in Columbus.
Camille?
Hi, I'm Camille Crary. I'm the Director of Legal Services and Public Policy at the Alliance.
Elaina?
Hi, I'm Elaina. I go by Ellie, but call me whatever. She, her, hers, and I am the victim advocate for the Law Director's Office in Mount Vernon, Knox County.
Thank you. Annie?
Hi, I'm Annie Stevens, she, her, hers. I'm the Forensic Nurse Coordinator for OhioHealth Central Ohio.
Thank you very much. So tell us a little bit more about VOCA and how do you use VOCA in your programs, VOCA for Survivor, and why is this conversation so important? Lori, let's start with you.
I was going to say, I'll take that one. So for us, VOCA is, I feel like there's not a word that kind of tells what VOCA does in our agency because it was doing so much and now we have a lot less to work with. Personnel is the biggest thing that it covers. And I'm saying personnel today because that's what it's basically covering today is personnel. Because of the cuts, all of the extra things were the first ones to go. It has impacted us hugely in terms of how we're using or doing our cost allocation. And then also we've had to make some changes as to how we're using that for personnel and how much personnel we've been able to maintain because of the cuts. But definitely a direct service. I mean, we're using it for direct services with personnel.
And Lori, you are a dual agency, correct?
Correct, yes.
So tell us more about the duality, because some of our members or audience might not understand what it means to be a dual agency.
Sure. So we are representing today the Rape Crisis Center for Knox County. That's what we do. We then also have our domestic violence side. So we're serving both sides of the work in terms of one agency. It's a small rural county. Knox County is not huge. So one agency and we cover all of it. We have a shelter. But then we also are doing all the direct services in terms of like our hospital, advocacy, all of those things on the OAESV side for any of the sexual assault.
Thank you. And Meg, tell us a little bit more about the work that SARNCO does with VOCA for the Central Ohio region, especially Franklin County.
Yes, so VOCA is primarily it's for a direct service for the intervention, and that is providing 24/7 helpline in our Central Ohio, Franklin County, 24/7 statewide helpline throughout the state and 88 counties. And then we provide 24/7 coverage for hospital response. And then we also have aftercare advocacy. We have 2 dedicated advocates that work with survivors beyond the call to the helpline or the emergency room visit. And so that primarily covers our staffing, the VOCA does. And then old VOCA last year, also with marketing, with temporary housing, with a lot of education for our advocates to remain competent and to get into practice. So yes, so these cuts are devastating also for us.
Thank you. Ellie, tell us a little bit more about how the VOCA funds actually impacts your agency, also in Knox County, but from the perspective of the prosecutor base or your organization.
Sure. It is detrimental. It's only me. I'm the only victim advocate in our office. Right now, the funds that were allocated this year for just for supplies, for emergency funds, anything like that. When a survivor comes to us, typically it's right after this incident occurred, and then they're kind of brought into this legal aspect of things. And so we try to explain and to minimize any confusion that comes with the court process in general, as well as when you're already facing a stressful situation. We provide resources on safety planning, counseling services in our community. We give them information on stalking and stalking logs, protection orders, information for new directions, how to secure your cell phone, and just those things that we are now trying to figure out a different way to get into their hands, because we really don't have anything else left for those supplies.
Thank you, Ellie. And Annie, you come into the mix from a perspective of a forensic nurse examiner, which is extremely important as that contact with survivors, right? How does VOCA actually affect the work that SANE nurses can do at the hospital and the work that they are providing to survivors of sexual violence and interpersonal violence as they walk in the emergency room?
Yeah, so here in Central Ohio, we faced a challenge about 5 years ago where our system was growing, our EDs were kind of multiplying, and we wanted to make sure that every survivor was seen when they come into our EDs and where also that they come, so that we don't have to transfer them or move them from ED to ED, because we realized that would be too traumatic for them. So we came up with a system-wide program here in Central Ohio that includes, we also have other programs in Marion, Mansfield, down in Athens County, and then Berger is also joining us too, in Morrow County, to create policies and procedures so that every survivor would be seen where they report and when they report. So we wouldn't, of course, have to transfer them. And they could get a full forensic exam by our specialized nurses who specialize in trauma-informed care and collection of evidence if that's what the survivor wants. And then in addition to that, we also safety plan with our survivors and help them, with supplies such as locks, cell phones, and other items like that. Clothing, we give our survivors clothing. Sometimes, we collect their clothing as evidence if that's what they want. Or if they come in as a trauma, there's times where their clothing may be cut off during that process. So we need to replace that clothing or items, that are lost during either before they come into the EDs or during their examination. So the VOCA funds have been very important in being able to have this program and develop this program over the last 5 years. So these cuts are very devastating to us also.
Thank you, Annie. So as we're talking about the SANE nurse, just in general, Lori and Meg, hospital advocacy is a core of a rape crisis center, right? That's part of our court standards, the ability of providing hospital accompaniment, hospital advocacy, and just being there. How does it actually affect? And tell us a little bit more about what hospital advocacy looks like in Knox County or in Franklin, even with the different hospital systems. Lori, let's start with you.
Sure. It's interesting as I feel like because we've gone through COVID, everything has kind of changed in terms of hospital advocacy. So we went from this period of time where we weren't doing any, we couldn't go in, and now we're back to going in. And we've been it gave us like a little bit of time, honestly, to rethink the things, like the elements that we're missing in our hospital advocacy. So as we were going into this, have said, here's some more things that we need to do. So when we get that phone call, someone is reporting to the hospital. We have a good working relationship with the emergency room department. And so we're there and we are with the survivor as long as they want us there. I will say one of the things that we have found is sometimes our advocates are actually providing advocacy and working through trauma with the survivors, always number one, but sometimes the same nurse, sometimes it's the law enforcement that's there, because the trauma, depending on the level, our advocates kind of come in as the calm. And so I'm spending that time and just being there, it's a lengthy process. So you're there for hours typically. But we had these kind of plans, like Annie was saying, we provide clothing, we do all of that in our county, we provide it for the hospital. We, like, when donation drives, that kind of thing, we ask for those things. But then, even like a snack pack and some wanting to put videos on an iPad, so that in that meantime, when the call comes, but the survivor's already at the hospital, here's a video of what you can expect. All of those things were things that we were planning on and thinking about during the COVID time, and funding, we were planning on having, to do all of the things. So now we've had to kind of rethink that, but at the same time, we're also moving. We're not rethinking it in terms of we're not going to do it. We're just rethinking it of how are we going to pay for this, because we know it's so important. But I think that people don't really understand the length of time that an advocate is there, and the length of time that the process of a sexual assault and everything that goes on at the hospital, it really is an intense few hours.
Yeah, the last studies actually from the Forensic Nurse Association actually indicated that depending on the severity, right, of the trauma or how they go in, it varies from 1 hour to 8 in collecting evidence, right, and providing those services. So normally you're not changing shift, not only the same nurse, right, but also the advocate. It's not changing. They're there in that continuum of care for that survivor from beginning to end. So Meg, tell us a little bit more in reference to that hospital advocacy that has provided at SARCO through OhioHealth.
Yes, we provide 24/7 coverage to 19 local emergency departments. Primarily they are OhioHealth, but we do serve Mount Carmel and OSU. And so pre-COVID, we would be dispatched and have to arrive within 30 minutes and arrive in person and be with the survivor from start to finish, as much or as little as the survivor wanted us to be a part of it. And yes, I completely endorse, say, Lori, what you said. It is very intense, and for all involved in the care and definitely the survivor. So after COVID hit, we had to pivot to telephone response in the ED. Oh, sorry, I think I cut out. So when COVID hit, we pivoted and we went to telephone advocacy, where we would respond by telephone and be transferred into the survivor's room and speak with them that way. And advocate feedback is we're definitely not being able to connect the same way we did in person, but it was the next best thing given the situation. And we've been working on an iPad project where, kind of like Marty, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Marty, where there's like a little iPad comes into the room. We're working on getting iPads into the room, and where we can have video conference, kind of like telehealth. So we're working on that, and we're also working on transitioning back to in person, and we're just going through all the steps to make sure that that's safe for our advocates, because many situations are the room is too small to be able to maintain a 6-foot distance to be safe for both the survivor and the advocate. So we're just fleshing that out right now. So it's a mixture of some staff and some volunteers for in hospital.
Thank you. Some
I think
staff
I
and
cut out
volunteer.
a mixture of staff and volunteer. And when we were in person, we always try to have a second row of on call so that we always had kind of 2 people on, because with 19 EDs, we're going to have more than one case at a different hospital potentially at the same time.
Yes, especially Columbus being as large as it is, right? So, Ellie, the advocacy that you provide, right, from the perspective of showing up and even giving additional support, how do you feel that with the VOCA cuts that is going to be impacted, and how is that going to change?
I think what is mainly going to change is that we are not going to be able to provide a whole lot of extra other than the services that we already have, court accompaniment, law enforcement interviews with the prosecutor, those kinds of things. It's going to be pretty bare bones. It's going to be, we don't have a whole lot of room for, like you guys said, ideas that we came up with during kind of the quiet of COVID. And so it's going to be pretty basic, unfortunately. We're not going to stop doing what we're doing. Like Lori said, we're just going to try to figure out a different way to pay for it.
Thank you, Ellie. Lori, Knox County is small, conservative. Telehealth, teleadvocacy might not work for everybody, also because there's also rural areas. So how do you walk and navigate through this process of the VOCA cuts, but also COVID and the disparities of accessibility for survivors and even advocates as a whole?
That's a good question, because we are trying our best and to reach all of the corners of our county. And like you said, there are parts that cell phones don't work. That's just the reality of where we are. But then also you get into the communication piece in terms of that we even exist, that we exist in a different way than we did even 2 years ago. We've made a lot of changes in our community as far as the services that we provide, how we approach survivors. We for sure have made changes. So I feel like there's this idea that it's just about the money, and it isn't just about the money. This is about like humanness and being able to connect, like Meg said, in person with someone is very different, and the relationship that can be built and the severity of what we're seeing has increased so much in the last 6 months. Our numbers have increased significantly, especially in the last year, but even post-COVID, we're noticing our numbers have increased. So here we are doing more work essentially with not more people and reaching. We're doing a good job of reaching more people, but we're still going to be absorbing all of that into these cuts. And someone eloquently said, this isn't about us making the cuts, we're just absorbing them because we didn't do this. And so now we have to figure out how to continue serving more people. We doubled our number in shelter in last fiscal year. So we're doubling, our hotline numbers have increased almost 40% since COVID. So when you look at those numbers, we're not doing that with more people. We're doing that with the same number of staff who are trying to work harder. And I don't have a single staff person, nor do I believe anyone else has a staff person who's going to pick up the phone on a hotline call and say, you know what, we've reached our numbers for today or for the month. We're not gonna serve you anymore. Oh, that hospital call that came, we're not gonna go. That's not how we function. That's not how we operate. So we will continue to do all of that, but it is a matter of like ability to maintain and think about burnout. It's like the spin of what can happen and the kind of the untangling of all of it, it really does go a lot more than on a spreadsheet. I think that's the important part. You know, we did spreadsheets and I have 3 columns of this is what it looks like with this cut and this cut and this cut. And so what does that mean in between? And how do we fill those gaps? How do we recognize this is what we are not going to have? And how do we reach those folks that we haven't reached, that we know are out there and we can't get to them, or they're not comfortable yet calling or don't have access to call? You know, we're looking at one of the things we had written into our VOCA grant that we are now not doing in the immediate is, because we are a rural county, with sending an advocate to the outlying areas at least, you know, a couple times a month, so that what we know is if someone's being stalked or they're being followed, their mileage is being checked. You can't drive 16 miles one way and not have that potentially be an impact, you know, because the abuser's watching you. So we wanted to, as part of our VOCA grant funding, send someone out, an advocate, to be available. And that's just one example of the things that we now have to really rethink. How are we going to do that? We cut all of that from our VOCA budget. So in a rural county, reaching everyone is now, it's even more difficult because we don't have the capacity to put people in the places where they need to be.
Definitely.
If I could piggyback off of Lori, Mount Vernon in Knox County, it's an interesting place because, you know, we have 3 college campuses in our community, but we also have a lot of very rural areas, and we have a large Amish population. So there are a lot of players, and it makes it difficult for those who live in a rural community to access our resources if we don't get creative. And just like New Directions was planning, we wanted to do more of a satellite service where we did go out into those communities, even if we're just sitting at the local police office for an hour. If someone wants to come to us and, you know, ask us questions or say, you know, what would this process look like? Or this is what's going on. Is this stalking? You know, we would be able to answer those questions for them, you know, like Lori said, without them being tracked, without them having to try to find a ride into town, and all sorts of barriers there. And so we're not able to do that anymore at the moment. And we have been doing a lot of community outreach. You know, we've been going to fire stations and talking to EMTs and first responders, you know, aside from law enforcement, and trying to gain their perspective, telling them that we're out here. You know, if you are on scene and you have a victim right there, you know, and you know that charges are going to be authorized, yes, first put them in touch with New Directions, and then give them our information for the next day when the arraignment comes, and then you're thrown in that world. And we're going to keep doing that, but it's sort of, it makes it not as seamless as we would like without the additional resources we were hoping for.
Definitely. Annie, from a same perspective, would these cuts mean less seeing nurses that already exist in the ED departments? Or
Right. Yes, that fear is definitely there. Forensic nursing has a very high burnout rate, high turnover rate. So we're constantly training new nurses. We have, like I said before, we have a very large system that we respond to, which includes, you know, inner city to more rural areas where our nurses have to travel to do cases. So we're constantly training our nurses. It is a specialty of nursing. So, you know, we have continuing education that we're constantly doing. We provide education to EMS and, you know, law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, if need be, about these special survivors, you know, and the special needs that they have. One of the plans that we had in progress was expanding our education to our inpatient unit. You know, we here in Central Ohio, we employ thousands and thousands of nurses and caregivers throughout our area, and providing that education of, how first to identify as a survivor of trauma on our inpatient units, and then next what to do to help that survivor if that's what they want, is important. And so we were expanding our services to provide that response on our inpatient units and our outpatient clinics. But we have to have the nurses to be able to provide that response. We have about 500 call outs, over 500 call outs a year as it is. So we need to have those nurses to support those additional calls, that will come in once we expand those services. So we're a bit fearful that we won't be able to expand at this time, but hopefully we can figure out a way to provide those services to every survivor.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
the other question that I do have in reference to the cuts, and sometimes people just look at it as, oh, you're just cutting staff, right? But staff are the ones who provide these services, right, to the victims. If you don't have enough advocates to be able to do that, that minimizes the approach or the ability for you to be effective, right? And the cuts for most of the programs are anywhere from 33% to 55.5%. And actually, Meg, Sarnco in itself, you guys got the largest cut of all of the rape crisis centers in a percentage based on the percentage amount. And then we also have the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center as a whole. But any amount actually affects. With locations as Knox County and Mount Vernon, as well as Franklin County and having OSU, part of the cuts implicated also campus advocates and those ability. Tell us a little bit more about how that's going to affect the dynamics of advocates being present in some of the college campuses, universities, or working with Title IX coordinators and things like that. So, Meg.
Sure. So OSU and we did have 2 dedicated advocates to OSU underneath an OSU grant. They did not get funded this year, and we worked very closely with OSU, and they were able to, with OSU monies, go ahead and still maintain having 1 advocate there. So we have a fabulous advocate coordinator there that will be able to help support that campus. And then we just heard last night that Columbus Community College are able to have 1 advocate there for them through their funding. Now, what we're going to do is we do have 2 aftercare advocates that can respond to the community, and then we're going to be reaching out to the universities to also build relationships with them so we can better support, because we're going to be seeing those survivors. So we're going to be cross-training our current advocates.
Thank you. And Lori, how about you? What was the impact with some of the college campuses?
Sure. So we have spent, honestly, the last, I would say, a solid 18 months working on our relationship with Kenyon College, which is in our county. We have 2 very extreme differences with Kenyon College, and then we have Mount Vernon Nazarene University. So very different in terms of their approach, specifically to sexual assault. We also have the Central, Community College, Central Ohio Community College is also here. That's all commuters. So we have spent 18 months really working on our relationship with Kenyon. Our sexual assault coordinator was going out advocate was going out at least once a week and spending like office hours on campus. We were co-facilitating a group out there for survivors on campus. Of course, COVID has changed things on what's on campus, but we have also worked to, they had a group on campus, they're called the SERPAs, which is the Sexual Respect Peer Advocates. They used to be a program that was under like a department on campus, and they wanted to be able to be trained and do some of the things that they couldn't do, they didn't have funding for on campus. So we had worked all this time to create this partnership with them. They were coming under us, so they're off campus, but we can support them as peer advocates on campus. We're having them trained. We'd already started this process before the VOCA cuts came, so we are continuing with that process. But we're going to have to adjust. I mean, what we had planned, our accessibility to students on campus is definitely different. And those are just, I mean, a quick example of how it's impacting us. But it was such a kind of labor of love for us in terms of working and getting us on that campus and creating this peer advocacy group with the Serpas, and then to have these cuts come, and I'm looking at a Zoom call with students from all across the country going, wait, does this mean we can't do this anymore? And we're saying, we'll figure it out. We know this is important. We know that, you know, just because funds are cut doesn't mean that sexual assault isn't still happening on campus. So we will still be here. We will continue to support this process. We're just going to have to figure it out as it goes. It's just not apples and oranges. And I think that's what is so frustrating sometimes. Like, oh, here, you know, there's not money, but still do it. And it isn't, it's not how it works. So, but we will continue, but it is definitely impacted the work on campus.
Definitely. And it is not apple and oranges, right? Or it's not as black and white as people tend to look at it from an even accounting perspective, right? Of how do you fit here and do this in the midst of two national crisis, right? We have a civil unrest and we have a pandemic. We have COVID-19, right? So, and understanding even those that do the work, 92% of our advocates and preventionists are survivors themselves. And in these 7 months, we have asked our advocates, our staff, to work in the midst of a pandemic. People have been showing up, and our numbers continue to be high. So sexual assault has not stopped from occurring. We just know that, unfortunately, fear is a factor for people reporting. It is one of the most underreported crime before COVID. And then with the announcements of COVID and the fear factor, right? A lot of people say, why even go, right? There's other things that are a priority, or I'm not going to get sick at the hospital, or they're going to turn me away, or courts have been closed, right? So and things have been postponed, and college students and K to 12 students have been sent home before the school year is over, or they're taking classes back online. But harassment still occurs, right? And violence still occurs, even if it's not presenting as acute. And it's so important for us to understand that with these cuts from this 33% to 55%, we're going back to 20 years of service. Limiting our services to what it looked like 20 years ago. And many have continued to say, you shouldn't be relying so much on VOCA. What would you say to those that say you shouldn't rely on VOCA? Lori, Meg, Ellie, what would you say to those? How could you not rely on VOCA?
I mean, I'll go first, and then everybody else can kind of chime in. We have multiple grants. I have 9 grants that I manage. So it isn't about relying on VOCA. I can be as creative as I need to be when it comes to cost allocation plans and spreadsheets. But the reality is, this funding is meant for survivors. So every single time you take money away, it isn't about looking at, you know, someone walking through the door for their job for the day. This is about taking money away from the services that we can provide to survivors. And while there is, you know, call it whatever you want, a trickle down effect, or you start peeling back the layers, and there's going to be impact on staff. And I feel like one of the things that we need to stress and just really consider is, this is a dollar amount right now, effective October 1st. What we don't know is what the impact is going to be 3 months from now, 6 months, 12 months, 3 years down the road, because we are asking people to do work in conditions and in situations where numbers are higher, survivors continue to increase, people recognize the need for advocacy, and the awesome employees and advocates that we have are not going to be able to do what they're doing now, serving this many people with this few staff. Like, that's just you can't do it and continue your work. I mean, and being successful. Like, we want our best selves every time we walk into that hospital room. We want our best selves every time a survivor walks through the door and we're providing advocacy. But if what we keep doing is spreading ourselves thinner and thinner and thinner, we're not giving our best selves to the survivors that we serve. And I think that's it isn't about a dollar amount. And I think that's the important piece of it is it isn't about spreadsheets, and we just don't know what this is going to look like, and the impact we're going back 20 years by a number, but we don't know what the impact is going to be moving forward, how many years, and how many staff can make it through this. How many, really, when it comes right down to it, how many staff are we going to lose because they can't handle it, because it's just too much, and we have to continue working to try and take care of staff so that they can be their best for survivors. And I think that part is difficult when you tell people the board approved increases, because this is what you do when you prepare a budget and have your board approve it in June and July, and then you have to come back in October and say, we've got to rescind that vote, that's gone, no increases, keep doing what you're doing, work a little harder, and we can't give you an increase. That's an impact on people's humanness. And I feel like that's somewhere along the way we've lost that human piece to numbers, and that I want to just continue to stress. So I went first, so you all take it away from there.
Thank you, Lori.
I'll chime in right after that. So everything Lori said, and the intention of the Victims of Crime Act is to support victims of crime. Boom, right there. And I would ask whoever's saying, well, don't depend so much on it. It's like, I would educate them in what's the true intention of the Victims of Crime Act, and then I would say, well, where are some other funding sources? Because we're looking for other funding sources, and just reiterating that, okay, we're doing more with less and less, and then that means other organizations are also doing less and less, and ultimately it's the survivor, the victim of crime, in any iteration of victim of crime, that is suffering the most. Because this year we are able to maintain our services, our direct services, but we're still sending those survivors out into the community where they have less services. So it's less and less and less and less support for that survivor, and not to mention that adds to burnout for those folks having to work within that broken system.
Definitely. Ellie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you ladies have said. You have to do more with less, and you have to figure out how to do that without it affecting the survivors. It's not about money that goes into my pocket. It's about the services that are provided to the victims and the survivors. That's what matters, and that's why we do what we do. That's why we're all here today. And to expect, an agency or a program to continue to thrive and continue to support victims as COVID continues, and as Lord knows what's going to happen in the near future, to be on your feet and to meet them where they are is getting harder and harder. I don't know any other funding sources at the moment except for VOCA that supports the position that I am in. And like Meg said, I'm looking, I can't find any. So we do rely on VOCA a lot. And I don't see that changing in the near future.
Thank you. Camille, what would be the call to action, right? We have to find every week what VOCA is. We've actually have position statements, but as a whole, what can we do in understanding, once again, as I mentioned, I believe at the beginning when we were having our conversation, that we recognize that our state has fulfilled the fundings that they received. There was a huge cut. It's not that they're hiding money, that they're not giving it because they don't want. But from $111 million to $55 million for 368 programs to only be able to approve 175, right? And still having, because the core is DV, domestic violence, sexual violence, and children within VOCA in itself. Those continues to be always the priorities. So it's not that they're hiding money, it's just that the money is not there for the amount of programs that actually exist as a whole. What does the federal government need to do? And what can we do as constituents, as agencies, to amplify the voices of survivors and to recognize that the time is now for us to go ahead and make the necessary calls that we need to make so that money does funnel through and is appropriated accordingly to VOCA?
Absolutely. So I think the number one thing that we need to do is help our friends, family, community members understand what the value to our entire society is by having VOCA-funded rape crisis centers. Our programs, you know, as we're talking about doing more with less, it's very close to home for me because before I worked in this field, I was an elementary school teacher, which is a field you're constantly being told, do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. But at the end of the day, kids are going to be in school and we all benefit from having well-funded schools, well-funded, well-rested teachers. And this is very analogous to me in that way that people are still going to be harmed regardless of the amount of funding. And at least for me, before I worked in this field, you sort of have this feeling that if something happens to you, there's an infrastructure there that will take care of you after that happens. And that would be great if we had a robust infrastructure. I think Ohio's done a brilliant job of developing that infrastructure. That will be gone now if we do not remedy this at the federal level. And so I think it's just about educating the community, educating as many people in power, both just people who go and vote and make decisions and engage, but also with power holders, people who are in power. We need to communicate the essential nature of what we're doing. And we need to remind everyone that we have come into fruition and we exist because the government needs us to exist. We're not here because we just felt like opening a rape crisis center. The government relies on us, and we cannot do that job without the government funding. So you need to do a few things, and it's an election period. And so I'm not going to give specific names because anything might change. But we're going to be providing resources on our website. Call your lawmakers and tell them that rape crisis services and crime victim services are essential, that they need to support higher level drawdowns in the future, but ultimately there needs to be better planning and better pursuit of prosecutions for white collar crime and collection of fines, because ultimately that is what pays for this resource. This is not a taxpayer funded fund. I think it's the best way to continue funding these resources. So look up your federal lawmaker, call that lawmaker, leave a message. They probably are not going to answer the phone right now. And if they do answer the phone, leave a message, because like I said, it's an election season. Everyone is out of the office campaigning, last minute types of things. Write a letter, email that letter to your lawmaker. See if anyone's in power. So David Joyce, for example, he is the co-chair of the Task Force on Violence Against Women. So even if he is not your lawmaker, send him an email with your concerns and share the impact with him. Share it with all of the folks on that task force. And again, we will provide a post on our website with the communication information for that. And with the state lawmakers, contact your state lawmaker and say, I need you to support my request for a VOCA increase in the future and these improvements. And have them send that on to the federal lawmaker. They work with the federal lawmakers on certain things. So if there's a federal lawmaker covering a district, they'll work in collaboration with the state lawmaker on various things. So it's about connecting with your lawmakers at every level, municipal, county, state, federal, and reminding them of the core essential nature and asking them over time. I do think it's going to take some time because, as Rosa said, the money is not available right now. But we will put those technical terms and the technical asks on the website in writing, so that you are able to use those and share those with your lawmakers, because it's so, so important. I think the biggest thing we need to do is make sure that we're being heard, and we need to make a lot of noise because we can't afford to go backwards. We can't afford to go back 2 decades. So that is my call to action. I will, like I said, make all of that information available on our social media accounts, and I'll email it to all of our member programs. And if you are watching this and you want that information, please email us at info@oaesv.org and we will make that available.
I thank you all so much for taking up your time and joining us as we amplify the voices for survivors, for our programs, for our counties, our community. Here at OESV, we do believe that we are stronger together. That we are not just asking for funding for rape crisis center, but all of the victims of crime programs within the state of Ohio, that as Ohioans, we demand more and we need more for the thousands of survivors that walk through our doors and that need our services, that we cannot continue to inflict harm on our staff, as well as continue to perpetrate harm on survivors by eliminating services that they are accustomed and that we are still not providing those services at a trauma-informed way. Because as we generate services and we're asking and we're demanding and cutting hours or locations or all of that, that's not trauma-informed, right? Of meeting survivors where they're at, of being able to walk with them in their healing processes. So for those that are listening to us today, how else can you support, embrace your voice, and amplify the voices of survivors? You could go directly to any of our community partners' webpage. Make a donation. It is almost Giving Tuesday. It is also coming up end of year. And I know you might be in difficult times, right? But the reality is that even $5 makes a difference for any of our organization. If all of us come together and start donating, we are able to go ahead and provide not only mask and PPE equipment, but actually the clothes that is needed after a SANE examination. We will be able to go ahead and provide support groups and counseling service. We will be able to go ahead and provide kits and information and services, or even a calling card, or able to provide transportation for survivors to go ahead and reach their appointments. So your contributions to the direct service providers makes a huge impact, makes a huge difference, and also your voices. Call, email, text. Let your voice be heard. VOCA needs to be funded in a different way. There are crimes being committed, and the courts need to go ahead and have those fines being applied to VOCA. We cannot continue to take away from Peter to give to Paul, right? So our survivors need our programs to be sustainable, to be at capacity, to handle the influx of survivors that we see. So for those of you, Lori, Annie, Ellie, as well as Meg that left us, thank you so much for your work. For the advocates that are watching, that are also in despair, please also know that we continue to be here. We continue to support you. We will find a way of ensuring that you do not continue to be kicked out of the movement and the calling that you have chosen by supporting survivors each and every day, which is supporting yourself, and ensuring that you're not victims of circumstances and finances in this time. So please reach out. ensure that we continue to walk together and that we continue to amplify. So thank you for being with us today. We hope to catch you again next week as we have this conversation with our Cincinnati area as well, and ensuring that their voices is also being heard. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.